Everything you know about human history is a neat, tidy story. We moved from stone tools to skyscrapers in a straight, logical line. But what if that line is a lie? Scattered across our planet are out-of-place artifacts, objects that simply shouldn't exist. From 100-ton stones fitted with laser-like precision to 300-million-year-old mechanical bolts. Today, we aren't just looking at weird rocks. We're looking at the glitches in the matrix of our past. Here are 9 impossible artifacts that prove history is wrong. Welcome to the high altar of ancient mysteries. We're standing in the Peruvian Andes, nearly 12,000 feet above sea level, looking at a site that shouldn't exist. This is Sacsayhuamán. Now, if you open a standard history book, it will tell you this was a fortress built by the Inca Empire in the 15th century. But the moment you lay eyes on these walls, you realize that the official story has a massive 200-ton problem. Let's talk about the sheer scale of this place. We aren't looking at small bricks or carved stones. We are looking at colossal limestone boulders. Some of these monsters stand over 9 meters tall and weigh as much as 150 to 200 tons. To give you a mental image, a modern Boeing 747 weighs about 150 tons. Imagine trying to move a 747, made of solid rock, across miles of jagged mountain terrain, up steep slopes and through narrow passes. The Inca didn't have the wheel, they didn't have iron tools, they didn't have heavy lift cranes. Yet, here these stones sit, moved and placed with a level of care that borders on the obsessive. But the weight isn't even the most impressive part. It's the fit. Look closely at the zigzag walls. These stones aren't just rectangles stacked on top of each other. They are complex, multi-dimensional polygons. Some stones have 12, 13, or even more angles, all interlocking perfectly with the stones around them like a giant 3D granite puzzle. The joints between these stones are legendary. There's a famous saying that you can't even fit a razor blade between them. And when you stand there, trying to slide a thin piece of paper or a human hair into the seam, you realize it's not an exaggeration. It's a physical reality. How did a Bronze Age civilization achieve this? Modern stonemasons, equipped with diamond-tipped saws and laser levels, would struggle to replicate this today. The traditional theory says they used stone-on-stone pounding, literally hitting one rock with another until they fit. But think about the physics. To fit a 100-ton rock into a multi-angled slot, you'd have to lift it, check the fit, lower it, grind the surface, and lift it again, hundreds of times. Without pulleys or steel cables, that process doesn't just seem difficult. It seems mathematically insane. If you look even closer at the surface, the mystery deepens. Many of these stones have a strange, vitrified appearance, a glass-like sheen on the edges. They don't look like they were carved with chisels. They look like they were softened. There's a radical theory that an ancient, lost technology existed, perhaps using focused solar energy or unknown chemical plant extracts that could literally turn solid limestone into a clay-like state. It sounds like science fiction, but when you see how the stones bulge out, almost as if they were pressed together while soft, the hammer and chisel explanation starts to feel like the bigger fantasy. There is a reason these walls are still standing after centuries. Peru is a land of massive earthquakes. Over the years, Spanish colonial cathedrals and modern concrete buildings in Cusco have been leveled by the Earth's tremors. But Sacsayhuamán? It hasn't budged an inch, because the builders didn't use mortar. By interlocking these stones in a complex three-dimensional weave, they created a kinetic structure. When an earthquake hits, the stones dance. They vibrate in place and then settle back into their original, perfect positions. This isn't just construction. It's high-level anti-seismic engineering from a culture we are told was primitive. When the Spanish conquistadors first saw this, they were terrified. They genuinely believed it was the work of demons or a race of giants. They asked the Inca, "How did you build this?" And the Inca's answer was telling. They said they didn't. They claimed it was already there, built by a previous race or the gods themselves long before the first Inca king arrived. Carbon dating is tricky with stone, but recent excavations have found evidence of occupation at the site dating back thousands of years before the Inca. Could it be that Sacsayhuamán is a remnant of a global, megalithic civilization that vanished at the end of the last ice age? Sacsayhuamán is a silent witness to a forgotten chapter of human history. It forces us to ask, is our progress a straight line, or have we reached high peaks of technology before, only to fall back into the dark? These 200-ton stones aren't just ruins. They are a physical glitch in our timeline, proving that whoever built them knew something about gravity, materials, and geometry that we are only now starting to rediscover. Our past isn't what we think it is. It's much heavier, much older, and much more mysterious than the history books dare to admit. Now, let's dive deep, literally. Imagine you're off the coast of Yonaguni Island, the westernmost point of Japan. You're floating in the crystal-clear blue of the Pacific, and suddenly, rising out of the seabed 25 meters below is a structure so massive and so geometric that your brain refuses to process it as a natural rock formation. This is the Yonaguni Monument, discovered by accident in 1986 by a diver looking for hammerhead sharks. It has since become the center of one of the fiercest debates in the history of archaeology. What makes Yonaguni so chilling is its geometry. We aren't just looking at a pile of rocks. We are looking at a massive, monolithic structure that resembles a stepped pyramid or a ceremonial altar. It's about 150 meters long and 40 meters wide. But the details are what really haunt the researchers. You'll find perfect 90-degree angles, straight edges, and flat, terrace-like platforms. There is a feature known as the Grand Staircase, a series of steps that look exactly like they were carved for human feet to climb. There are also deep, straight channels cut into the stone, and a twin-pillar feature that looks like two massive columns standing guard. Now, mainstream geologists will tell you this is natural. They argue that the sandstone here fractures easily along straight planes due to tectonic activity. They call it actual plane cleavage. But stand there, even in photos, and ask yourself, does nature create a perfect right-angle corner tucked inside a 2-meter-tall step surrounded by a flat plaza? Does nature carve a 10-meter-deep, perfectly straight trench? The symmetry here is so deliberate that many, including Dr. Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist who has spent 15 years diving here, believe it is impossible for this to be a coincidence. But here is where the impossible part turns into a full-blown mystery. Let's assume for a moment that Yonaguni is man-made. If it is a city, a temple, or a stadium, when was it built? This area was last above sea level at the end of the last ice age, roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. This creates a massive rift in our understanding of history. According to the standard timeline, 10,000 years ago, humans were primitive hunter-gatherers. We weren't building monolithic pyramids. We were barely figuring out agriculture. If Yonaguni is man-made, it means there was a civilization capable of high-level masonry and architectural planning thousands of years before the pyramids of Giza or the temples of Sumer. It implies a lost mother culture that was swallowed by the rising oceans when the ice melted. Dr. Kimura and his team claim to have found more than just walls. They've documented what looks like a primitive road surrounding the structure, traces of animal carvings that resemble a turtle, and even small holes drilled into the rock, possibly for wooden posts. There's also the face, a large rock formation that looks eerily like a human head with carved eyes and a mouth. Critics call it pareidolia, our brain's tendency to see patterns in random shapes. But when you add the face to the staircase, the channels, and the plazas, the natural explanation starts to feel like a desperate attempt to protect the status quo of history. The Japanese government hasn't designated Yonaguni as a cultural heritage site, largely because of this controversy. If they admit it's man-made, they have to rewrite every textbook in Japan and arguably the world. It's easier to call it a geological anomaly. But for the divers who swim through its narrow corridors and touch the razor-sharp 90-degree edges, it doesn't feel like an anomaly, it feels like a ghost. A ghost of a world that existed before the Great Flood. The Yonaguni Monument serves as a powerful reminder of how much we don't know about our own planet. Over 70% of the Earth is covered by water, and we've explored less than 5% of it. What other cities are sitting in the dark, silent depths, waiting to tell us that we are not the first advanced people? Yonaguni isn't just a rock. It's a challenge. It challenges us to look past the surface and consider that the cradle of civilization might not be in the deserts of Mesopotamia, but deep beneath the waves of the Pacific. It forces us to realize that history isn't just written in books, it's carved in stone, sometimes in places we were never meant to see again. Imagine you are walking along the limestone bed of the Paluxy River in Glen, Texas. The sun is hot, the water is low, and beneath your feet, you see something unmistakable: the three-toed tracks of a theropod dinosaur from the Cretaceous period. It's a 110-million-year-old moment, frozen in mud. But then, you look just a few inches to the left, and your heart skips a beat. Right there, in the same layer of ancient rock, is a human footprint. Not just a smudge, but a clear, five-toed, elongated heel-and-toe impression of a human being. This is the mystery of the Glen footprints, and it represents a collision of timelines that, if true, would shatter everything we understand about biological evolution. Now let's look at the science of the track itself. According to the standard geological timeline, dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. The first modern humans didn't show up until about 300,000 years ago. That is a gap of nearly 64.7 million years. They are never supposed to meet. Yet in the Paluxy River, these tracks don't just exist in the same area. In some cases, the human track is actually stepped on by a dinosaur track, or vice versa. The most famous of these is the Taylor Trail. It consists of a series of 14 tracks that look eerily human in their gait and shape. Some of them are large, almost giant-sized, but they show the distinct pressure points of a bipedal human walk: a heavy heel strike, a long arch, and the push-off from the ball of the foot. When researchers first saw this, the world of paleontology went into a defensive frenzy. The official explanation? Mainstream scientists argue that these aren't human footprints at all. They claim they are eroded dinosaur tracks. They suggest that as the mud filled back into a dinosaur's three-toed print, it collapsed in a way that left an elongated shape resembling a human foot. Others suggest they are man-made carvings from the Great Depression era, created by locals to sell to tourists. But here's where the erosion theory starts to leak. If you cross-section these tracks, meaning you cut through the rock to see the compression layers underneath, the mud is compressed in a way that matches the weight of a living being stepping into it. You can't carve compression. And while erosion can do strange things, it rarely creates a consistent left-right-left walking pattern of 14 consecutive steps that perfectly mimic a human stride. Then, there are the outliers. The Burdick track, found in the same region, shows a human-like print in a cross-section of rock that reveals the internal structure of the displacement. Even more controversial is the Alvis Delk print, which shows a dinosaur track overlapping a human footprint. If this stone is genuine and not a sophisticated hoax, it is a smoking gun. It would mean that humans and dinosaurs didn't just exist in the same era, they shared the same muddy riverbanks. So why does this matter? If these tracks are real, our entire method of dating the Earth, the stratigraphic layers we rely on, could be fundamentally wrong. Or, perhaps the human story is much, much older than we dare to imagine. Are we looking at a glitch in the fossil record? Or is it possible that a human-like species, perhaps an ancestor we haven't discovered yet, was walking the Earth 110 million years ago? Critics will say that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and they are right. The Glen footprints have been weathered by water and debated by experts for decades. Many have been dismissed as clever fakes or natural oddities. But for those who have stood in that riverbed, looking at the stride of a man next to the stride of a monster, the erosion explanation feels just as hard to believe as the alternative. The Glen footprints remind us that the fossil record is not a complete book. It's a collection of torn pages. We find what the Earth chooses to preserve. Whether these are truly the steps of an ancient human or a trick of the light and limestone, they force us to remain curious. They remind us that history is a living, breathing investigation, And sometimes the most impossible things are right there under our feet, waiting for us to have the courage to see them for what they really are. In the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from any mainland, lies a tiny speck of land known as Easter Island, or Rapa Nui. Scattered across its volcanic landscape are nearly 900 monolithic stone figures known as Moai. These aren't just heads. Excavations have revealed they have massive bodies buried deep beneath the soil. But the mystery of the Moai isn't just about what they represent, it's about how they got there. We are looking at a logistical nightmare that defies everything we know about primitive engineering. Let's look at the numbers. The average Moai stands about 4 meters tall and weighs around 14 tons. However, the largest finished statue, known as Pharaoh, stands nearly 10 meters high and weighs a staggering 82 tons. To put that in perspective, that's like moving 15 fully grown African elephants across miles of uneven volcanic terrain. The Rapa Nui people had no wheels, no draft animals, and very limited timber for rollers. Yet they moved these giants from the volcanic quarry at Rano Raraku to ceremonial platforms called ahu all around the island's coastline. In some cases, these statues had to travel over 11 miles. How do you move an 80-ton block of stone over hills and valleys using only manpower and primitive rope? When early European explorers asked the islanders how their ancestors moved the statues, the answer was always the same. The statues walked. For a long time, historians dismissed this as a colorful myth. They assumed the islanders must have used wooden rollers, a theory that led to the idea of ecocide, that the Rapa Nui people cut down every tree on the island to move the statues, eventually destroying their own civilization. But recent experiments by archaeologists like Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo have suggested that the legends might be literally true. They discovered that the Moai are designed with a unique D-shaped base and a center of gravity that leans forward. By using 3 teams of people with heavy ropes, they found they could rock the statue back and forth, making it waddle forward. In a very real sense, the statues were designed to walk. But even with this discovery, moving an 80-ton giant like Pharaoh remains an achievement that modern engineers still struggle to fully replicate. If the bodies weren't enough of a puzzle, consider the pukao, the massive red stone cylinders that sit on top of the Moai's heads like hats. These pukao weigh up to 12 tons each and are made of a different type of volcanic stone from a completely different quarry. How did the islanders lift a 12-ton red cylinder onto the head of a 10-meter-tall statue? Some suggest they built massive ramps of sand and stone, rolling the hats up to the top. Others think they used a complex system of levers. Either way, the precision required to balance a 12-ton hat on a narrow stone head hundreds of years ago suggests a level of physics and structural engineering that we rarely credit to isolated ancient cultures. Beyond the engineering, there is the question of why. Many Moai face inland, watching over the villages, but their eyes, originally inlaid with white coral and obsidian, were said to hold mana, or spiritual power. The Rapa Nui weren't just moving rocks. They were creating a sophisticated network of ancestral protection. They were master navigators who found this tiny island in the vast ocean and then turned it into a laboratory of megalithic construction. The Moai of Easter Island are a testament to the power of human will and hidden knowledge. They prove that isolation doesn't mean a lack of sophistication. When we look at these stone giants, we see a glitch in our assumption that technology always requires machines. The Rapa Nui used gravity, geometry, and communal rhythm to achieve the impossible. They remind us that our ancestors didn't just survive, they thrived by mastering the laws of nature in ways we are only now beginning to understand. The Moai aren't just statues, they are a silent message from the past, telling us that with the right knowledge, even the heaviest stones can be made to walk. In 1998, a team of Russian researchers known as the Cosmopoisk Group was exploring a remote region in the Kaluga district of Russia. They weren't looking for jewelry or ancient pottery, they were searching for remains of a fallen meteorite. But what they found instead was far more disturbing. One of the researchers picked up a piece of rock, cracked it open, and found a perfectly formed, threaded iron bolt embedded deep inside the stone. Now, discovery of a bolt isn't unusual. What is unusual is the rock itself. Geological analysis confirmed that this stone was formed roughly 300 to 320 million years ago. This was a time before the dinosaurs, long before the first mammal, and hundreds of millions of years before humans even thought about inventing the wheel, let alone a threaded mechanical screw. Let's look at the object under a microscope. The bolt is about 2 centimeters long. It has a clearly defined head and a shaft with uniform, rhythmic threading, exactly like the bolts you'd find at a hardware store today. When the Cosmopoisk team took the rock for X-ray analysis, the mystery deepened. The X-rays revealed that there wasn't just one bolt. There was another one hidden deeper inside the rock, along with what appeared to be 2 strange, tiny microbeads of metal. How does a mechanical component become part of a solid rock that predates even the Permian extinction? If this is a real, manufactured object, it suggests that an industrial civilization was operating on Earth, or perhaps visiting Earth, at a time when the most advanced life forms were early amphibians and massive insects. Of course, mainstream science has a very different explanation. When photos of the Kaluga bolt went viral, paleontologists quickly stepped in with a more earthly theory. They believe the bolt is actually a fossilized crinoid. Crinoids, or sea lilies, were marine animals that were extremely common 300 million years ago. They had long, segmented stems made of calcium carbonate discs. When a crinoid dies and its stem becomes fossilized in sediment, it can leave behind a shape that looks remarkably like a threaded screw. Over millions of years, the organic matter dissolves, and minerals replace the shape, leaving a screw embedded in the rock. But proponents of the ancient technology theory aren't convinced. They point out that while crinoid stems are common, they are usually much smaller and don't typically have the head of a bolt or the precise, uniform threading found in the Kaluga specimen. Furthermore, the X-ray evidence of multiple bolts and metal beads doesn't fit the biological pattern of a sea lily. There is also the question of the material. If it were a fossil, it should be made of the same mineral as the surrounding rock, limestone or calcite. However, early reports suggested the bolt was metallic or at least had a chemical composition distinct from the rock matrix. Unfortunately, like many controversial artifacts, the Kaluga bolt has been subject to limited independent peer-reviewed study, leaving us in a gray zone between fossilized biology and ancient machinery. If we move away from the fossil theory, we are left with mind-bending possibilities. Is it possible that the Earth's history is cyclical? That advanced civilizations rise and fall every few 100 million years, leaving almost nothing behind but a few scraps of iron? Or, as some fringe theorists suggest, are we looking at evidence of time travel, or extraterrestrial visitors who dropped a piece of hardware while exploring a prehistoric swampy Earth? The Kaluga bolt is a perfect example of how our perspective changes based on the lens we use. A paleontologist sees a dead sea creature, an enthusiast sees an ancient machine. But regardless of what you believe, the bolt forces us to acknowledge that our record of the deep past is incredibly thin. We are trying to reconstruct a 4-billion-year-old story using only a few shattered pieces of stone. Whether it's a trick of nature or a piece of impossible technology, the Kaluga bolt remains a stubborn reminder that the Earth still holds secrets that our current science cannot fully explain. It's a tiny object that carries the weight of a massive question. Just how many civilizations have called this planet home before us? For 3,000 years, Egyptian art followed a strict, unchanging code. Pharaohs were always depicted as the pinnacle of human physical perfection: broad shoulders, muscular limbs, and stoic faces. But around 1350 BCE, a ruler named Akhenaten ascended the throne and did something unthinkable. He didn't just change the religion of Egypt, he changed the very shape of the human body in art. When you look at the statues of Akhenaten found at Karnak and Amarna, you aren't looking at a traditional king. You are looking at a figure with a deeply elongated skull, a thin, feminine neck, spindly arms, heavy thighs, and a protruding, pot-bellied stomach. This wasn't a secret. He ordered his artists to portray him this way. The question that has haunted Egyptologists for a century is, why? Was this a radical new art style, or was Akhenaten forcing the world to see a physical reality that defies our understanding of human biology? For decades, mainstream scientists tried to diagnose Akhenaten from his statues. They suggested he suffered from Marfan syndrome, a genetic disorder that causes long limbs and thin faces. Others pointed to Froelich's syndrome, which could explain the feminine fat distribution. But there's a problem. These conditions often lead to infertility, yet Akhenaten famously fathered at least 6 daughters and was the father of the boy king, Tutankhamun. This is where the impossible artifact part comes in. It's not just Akhenaten. His wife, Nefertiti, and their daughters are all depicted with these same incredibly elongated, egg-shaped skulls. If this were just an artistic choice, why did it vanish the moment Akhenaten died? As soon as his reign ended, Egypt desperately tried to erase him from history, smashing his statues and returning to the traditional perfect human form. It's as if they were trying to hide a biological anomaly that shouldn't have existed. In recent years, the mystery moved from the museum to the lab. DNA testing on the remains of the Amarna royalty, including King Tut, revealed some startling anomalies. While they were definitely human, researchers found evidence of an unusually high number of genetic mutations and a skull shape that was naturally elongated, not bound or deformed by bandages. This brings us to the most controversial theory of all. Some researchers, looking at the sheer strangeness of the Amarna family, ask if Akhenaten was a product of a different kind of intervention. Ancient astronaut theorists go as far as to suggest that Akhenaten was a hybrid, a bridge between humanity and something else. Even if we stay grounded in science, we have to admit, Akhenaten looked like no other human in recorded history. He called himself the son of the sun, and he behaved as if he belonged to a different species entirely. Akhenaten's revolution wasn't just physical, it was intellectual. He abolished the pantheon of gods and insisted on the worship of a single abstract power, the Aten, represented by a sun disk with hands reaching down. His poetry and hymns speak of a sophisticated understanding of light and energy that feels thousands of years ahead of its time. Was his physical appearance a reflection of this otherworldly knowledge? In many ancient cultures, an elongated skull was a sign of the gods or a higher caste of beings with superior intelligence. By carving his impossible body into stone, was Akhenaten leaving us a permanent record of a brief moment when the human lineage was altered? The statues of Akhenaten are more than just art. They are a biological puzzle. They represent a 17-year glitch in the 3,000-year history of Egypt. Whether he was a man suffering from a unique cocktail of genetic disorders or a representative of a lost branch of the human family tree, his image remains a haunting challenge to our definitions of normal. Akhenaten proves that history isn't just about what we built. It's about who we were. And sometimes, the face looking back at us from the dust of the desert is so strange, so impossible, that we are forced to rethink what it actually means to be human. For thousands of years, the city of Dwarka was considered nothing more than a beautiful legend. In the Indian epic, the Mahabharata, Dwarka was a magnificent golden city built by Lord Krishna himself. It was said to be a marvel of engineering, with high walls, vast palaces, and organized streets. But the story ends in tragedy. When Krishna left the earth, the ocean rose and swallowed the entire city in a single day. For centuries, historians dismissed this as mere poetry. They argued that Indian civilization wasn't that old, and certainly not that advanced. But in the early 2000s, marine archaeologists from India's National Institute of Ocean Technology were conducting a survey in the Gulf of Combat when they found something that sent shockwaves through the scientific world. Deep beneath the waves, they discovered a vast, submerged urban sprawl, stretching for 5 miles across the seabed. What they found wasn't just a few scattered rocks. Using side-scan sonar, they mapped out a systematic urban layout. There were foundations of massive structures, rectangular buildings, and what appeared to be a complex drainage system. They found stone anchors, pottery fragments, and walls that were still standing despite being underwater for millennia. But the real impossible part came when they carbon-dated a piece of wood recovered from the site. The results came back at 7,500 BCE. Now pause for a moment and think about that date. According to our mainstream timeline, the first great civilizations were Sumeria and Egypt, which began around 3,500 BCE. If Dwarka dates back to 7,500 BCE, it means there was a sophisticated, organized city in India 4,000 years before the pyramids were even a thought. It pushes the cradle of civilization back to the end of the last ice age. How did it get there? The discovery of Dwarka perfectly matches the timeline of the melting of the glaciers at the end of the ice age. As the sea levels rose globally by over 100 meters, coastal cities would have been submerged. Dwarka isn't just a site, it's proof that our ancestors experienced a global cataclysm that we now only remember through flood myths. Critics and skeptical archaeologists argue that the carbon dating might be flawed, or that the structures are natural rock formations shaped by currents. But nature doesn't build cities with 90-degree street grids and sophisticated water management systems. And nature doesn't leave behind thousands of artifacts like stone, tools, and jewelry in a concentrated area. The physical evidence is staring us in the face. A city that was supposed to be a myth is sitting right there on the ocean floor. The ruins of Dwarka suggest that the people of that era had a profound understanding of maritime engineering and urban planning. The city was built at a strategic location to handle trade and sea tides. If the Mahabharata is even 10% accurate in its description of Dwarka's splendor, we are looking at a society that understood geometry, metallurgy, and social organization at a level that we previously thought was impossible for that time. Dwarka changes everything. It tells us that our myths are often just memories of a history we've forgotten. It proves that there are entire chapters of the human story, massive, thriving chapters that are currently hidden under hundreds of feet of water. When we look at these sunken walls, we have to realize that our current historical truth is only based on what stayed dry. Dwarka is a reminder that the ocean is the world's greatest museum, and it's finally starting to give up its secrets. It's not just proving history wrong, it's proving that our ancestors were far more resilient, far more advanced, and far more ancient than we ever dared to believe. In 1993, high on the desolate Yukok Plateau in Siberia, archaeologists opened a burial mound that had been frozen solid for over 2,500 years. Inside, they found a tomb filled with ice. As they carefully melted the block, a woman emerged, preserved so perfectly that you could still see the skin on her fingers. She became known as the Ice Maiden. But what shocked the world wasn't just her preservation. It was what was written on her skin. Across her shoulders and arms were the most incredible, sophisticated tattoos ever seen from the ancient world. They weren't crude marks. They were intricate, surrealist depictions of mythical creatures, deer with griffins' beaks and flowery antlers. These tattoos look like they were done by a modern master in a luxury studio in Paris or New York, yet they were inked by nomadic horsemen in the 5th century BCE. The Pazyryk culture is officially described as a group of Scythian nomads. Our history books usually paint nomads as primitive, warring tribes with no fixed home. But the Pazyryk mummies tell a different story. Along with the Ice Maiden, researchers found a man, likely a chieftain, whose entire torso was covered in a tapestry of fantastic beasts. These tattoos aren't just art, they are a technological mystery. To achieve this level of detail and pigment depth, you need high-quality needles and specific soot-based inks. The precision suggests a professional class of tattoo artists within a society we thought was purely focused on survival. But the glitch goes deeper than the ink. When scientists performed CT scans on these mummies, they found something even more impossible. One of the male mummies showed evidence of a sophisticated brain surgery, a trepanation. The skull had been opened and repaired with such surgical precision that the bone had actually begun to heal. This means the barbarian patient survived a complex cranial operation 2,500 years ago without modern anesthesia or sterile operating rooms. Furthermore, the Ice Maiden herself was found to have suffered from breast cancer. The placement of specific herbs and a pouch of cannabis found next to her suggests that these people were using targeted medicinal treatments for pain management and perhaps even to slow the progression of chronic diseases. They had an advanced understanding of anatomy and pharmacology that rivals many civilizations that came long after them. Perhaps the most mysterious part of the Pazyryk mummies is their clothing and treasures. They were found with silk from China and intricate wool carpets from Persia. The Pazyryk carpet, found in one of the tombs, is the oldest knotted pile carpet in existence. Its design is so complex it looks like it was made on a modern industrial loom. How did a group of people living in the freezing Siberian mountains maintain a trade network that spanned thousands of miles and possessed such refined aesthetic tastes? They were a bridge between the East and the West, holding on to a level of culture that doesn't fit the primitive label we've given them. The Pazyryk mummies are a mirror reflecting a lost peak of human refinement. They prove that ancient does not mean simple. When we look at the Ice Maiden's tattoos, we aren't looking at a primitive tribe. We are looking at a society that valued beauty, understood the human body, and connected the world in ways we are only now beginning to map. These mummies aren't just artifacts. They are people who were far more like us than we'd care to admit. They remind us that history is not a climb from darkness into light, but a series of brilliant flickers. Cultures that mastered their world in the shadows of the mountains, leaving only their skin to tell us how magnificent they truly were. Our final stop takes us to the islands of Malta and Gozo. Here stand the megalithic temples, structures that were already ancient when the first stone was laid for the Great Pyramid of Giza. Built between 3600 and 2500 BCE, these temples are a marvel of prehistoric engineering. But hidden among the massive limestone blocks are details that mainstream history struggles to explain. We aren't just looking at worship sites, we are looking at what appear to be remnants of a massive, stone-based mechanical technology. The first part of this puzzle is found across the island's rocky surfaces, thousands of deep, parallel grooves known as cart ruts. They look exactly like railway tracks carved directly into the hard limestone. Some of these tracks run straight off cliffs or lead directly into the ocean, continuing deep underwater. Official theories suggest they were sled tracks for moving stones. But there's a problem. The ruts often turn at impossible angles or intersect in ways that resemble a complex train yard. If these were made by wooden sleds, the friction alone would have burned the wood to ash. Many independent researchers look at these tracks and see something else. A massive, island-wide transport system, perhaps involving heavy machinery or geared platforms that we have yet to rediscover. But the most impossible artifacts are the stones found inside the temples like Wadartim and Tarxian. Archaeologists have uncovered perfectly circular stone discs with holes in the center and strange, rhythmic notches around the edges. When you look at them, your brain instantly thinks, gears. Mainstream experts call them altars or votive offerings. But if you place these discs together, the notches seem to interlock. There are also stone spheres found in the hundreds, perfectly round ball bearings that fit into carved stone tracks under the massive 20-ton lintels. Was the entire temple complex a giant machine? Some theorists suggest these temples were actually ancient acoustic resonators or astronomical computers designed to track the movements of the stars with mechanical precision. The Malta mechanisms weren't just about physical movement, they were about the movement of sound. The Halsafliani hypogeum, a massive underground labyrinth, features a man's chamber that resonates at exactly 110 Hz. This specific frequency is known today to shift human brain activity into a state of deep meditation or trance. The builders of Malta didn't just stack rocks, they tuned the earth. They used stone as we use silicon and steel today, as a medium for advanced information and sensory control. Around 2500 BCE, the people who built these machines simply vanished. There is no evidence of war or plague. They just stopped building, left their gears in the dirt, and disappeared from the record. Why? Did their technology fail them? Or did they simply move on to something we can't even imagine? The stone mechanisms of Malta force us to rethink the word technology. We assume technology must be electric, plastic, or digital, but Malta shows us a path not taken, a lithic technology where gravity, sound, and stone were harnessed with a genius that we can barely decode today. These aren't just ruins, they are the skeletal remains of a prehistoric computer, a giant clockwork island that proves our ancestors were far more than just temple builders. They were engineers of the impossible. We started this journey with 200-ton walls in Peru and ended with stone gears in Malta. These 9 artifacts are more than just curiosities. They are cracks in the wall of our perceived history. They tell us that humanity has fallen and risen many times over, and that the story of our past is far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more exciting than the version we were taught in school. The question is, are we ready to listen to what the stones are trying to tell us?